Welcome to the History Slam podcast, inaugural edition,
Woo!
which is very exciting. We're coming at you today nearly live from Waterloo, Ontario, host site of the Social Sciences Congress.
Yes.
And we're here as part of the CHA part, so we're on the Waterloo campus, home of the Fightin' Warriors. And I'm here today from ActiveHistory.ca and from Western University now.
Yes, Western University.
Ian Milligan.
Not to be confused with the University of Western Ontario.
Right, yes. Yes, completely different things. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
No problem. So, we met a few years ago at an event actually at Western.
Yes.
The popular writing workshop.
Yes, the one
in London,
with
yes.
Niche.
Yeah, with that great event, talking about how to reach out to people. And I know you guys, there was a group of you there, you and Jay Young and Tom Peace was there.
Yes, and Jim Clifford was there.
So
And Christine McLaughlin, I think, as well.
Okay. Oh, wow.
I can't completely remember, but there was a good gang of us that came in.
It was almost 3 years ago now, I think. And you guys were talking about active history then.
Yes, we were just starting out.
Yeah, so the website, where does it come from? What was the original idea?
The website, actually, Active History started before the website.
Okay.
It started with a conference that was run by Jim Clifford, Tom Peace, both at York, and then Victoria Freeman at the U of T, and Lisa Helps, who I believe is at the University of Victoria, now a city councillor in Victoria.
Wow.
So she's really doing the active history front. So the four of them decided, I think after Tom and Jim had finished their comprehensive exams, they wanted to reach out to the broader public and basically mobilize knowledge that was going on within the academy to the outside.
Right.
And one of the major contexts of that was the economic crisis. And them saying, their argument was, the media says the business cycle, oh my God, it exists. And their point was, if they'd read any of the history and any of the work that's gone on within the academy, this wouldn't have been quite the surprise that it seemed in 2008.
Sure.
So they did the conference. It was great. And then afterwards, they still had some seed money left over from their shirt grant.
Okay.
And we're looking for ways to disseminate it.
Yep.
So I know they bandied about, do we want to do an edited collection? Do we want to do a special issue of a journal or a newsletter? Mm-hmm. And after a while, they decided, why don't we do something new? Why don't we set up a website?
Yep.
So then Jim and Tom were the ones who took the dissemination task on, and then brought Jay Young, myself, and Christine McLaughlin on board, all of us at York.
Yes.
So then we had 5 people set out to create this website.
Okay, and it's really grown.
It has. We started out, the goal was actually modeled on a British site called History and Policy. Uh-huh. And the idea was to get historians to write basically short essays, like 2,000 to 4,000 word papers that would deal with a contemporary policy issue, but informed by their scholarship, put it online, and hopefully inform the media, policymakers, journalists, etc.
Right, and would you guys say you've been successful to that end? I mean, like I know when we talked a couple months ago in Guelph, you were talking about the number of hits, and the number of hits on the sites keeps going up and up and up. But in terms of reaching that demographic, do you think that's what you're doing, or are you crossing those boundaries? Or are you still speaking mostly to historians, or? Yeah,
well, the short paper thing didn't work out as we had planned. We did have a few short papers, and some of them still get probably the most hits of anything on the website. But generally, the short paper idea didn't take traction. We had some issues with review, how much review do we put into it, and the issue that realistically asking an academic to write a long format essay without any academic credit, we were running into scholarly problems. We were also this basically unknown website, so as we sent emails to professors saying, can you write us an article, essentially, we ran into some never resistance. Everybody was positive, but everybody has a finite amount of time, and workloads keep going.
Yeah, you got a million things to do with committees and papers, like academic papers, conferences. And by the way, you got students to deal with too.
Yes, no, it's a busy life. So we actually found by transitioning, we started blogging, and it was slow at first. Mm-hmm. We started to develop a schedule, and blogging is what's exploded. And what that has generally entailed is our posting schedule, especially during the school year, is about. We try not to go 5 days a week because Friday's a pretty slow day. Yeah. Monday to Thursday, definitely usually Monday and Wednesday at a minimum we have posts. And that's let us reach an audience because it's people writing on what they're really interested in. Every day we seem to add yet another guest contributor. Sometimes people just contribute once. Sometimes they contribute and they become a regular contributing editor on the site. But and as we get more content, we reach more audience because suddenly we can bring in Google traffic. So we watch our analytics, and we've seen our site hits creep up.
Mm-hmm.
I think our most recent month we had 10,000 individual visitors.
Wow.
So that's not page views. That's 10,000 different people who have accessed our site.
That's a lot.
Which is astounding. And a lot of it, we've got the regular viewers.
Yeah.
Like a post might go up on Twitter. We're getting some posts are getting retweeted 50, 60 times.
Okay.
And we're bringing in 500 upwards, sometimes to 1,000 on a new post.
Yeah.
If it's something that strikes a chord, like archives or activism or something.
Yeah.
But otherwise, because we now have this backlog of basically 2 years of sustained blogging, as people, we look at the analytics and you see the Google searches that are bringing people to our site. So if you Google a topic of historical importance in Canada, chances are you might find an active history post on the first page or two of those search results. Right. So I think we are actually reaching large audiences.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned the Google search, because I think a lot of people, an issue comes up, they throw it into Google and they're just going to click on something.
Yes.
Right? So even if you can get traffic that's unintentional traffic, that's really how you can reach people. And then somebody clicks on it seemingly by accident and they're like, hey, this is kind of cool, and then they tell somebody and then that sort of helps explode everything, right?
Yeah. And I mean, my stepmom is a librarian in Mississauga, and she just sent me an email a few days ago saying she was helping somebody with a problem, a high school student, and they did some internet searches together, and she was like, the best source I found was your website.
Wow.
Which, I mean, she's biased, but
a little bit. But
the fact that it popped up in this, 2 or 3 top hits on this subject, which I think was prohibition in Ontario, was, I think, a testament to our site.
For sure. So, what's the team? Is the team relatively the same in terms of the people behind the site, or turnover, or
the central team is still basically there's 6 of us who are quite central now. We did have a 7th who's in a transition period right now, but. Basically, Jim, Tom, Christine, Jay, and myself were the original team, and then we also have Krista McCracken, who's really taking sort of a social media lead. Mm-hmm. And additionally, Brittany Luby, who's another PhD candidate at York University, has been really taking a lead on some partnerships we've had in the Toronto area. So running a speaker series with the History Education Network, Venhier, which has also been successful, because part of the goal is to also move away from the website and out into the community.
Sure.
So we've had these workshops with Venhier. We ran a fairly successful public speaker series with the Toronto Public Library. Actually, there's been 2 versions of it run by Lisa Vermeil, who's a postdoc at McMaster University. And then we also ran a much smaller one in the Mississauga Public Library that similarly got people out from the community to get a historian to talk.
Right.
About 40, 50 minutes, just on their research, but in a very colloquial, accessible, fun, dynamic way.
Yeah, and I found that people, when it's delivered properly, I think non-specialists, people from the community, when they get access to it, I think that they really do respond to it a lot of the times. Mm-hmm. Like I did a talk, maybe it's different because people were not forced, but it was at Public Service Canada, one of their branches in Ottawa, and it was in February, and it was about Black History Month, and in the context of the anniversary of the War of 1812. So they had a whole exhibit set up in the room all day, and then I came in around, I think 11:30 or something. So people were allowed to take an early lunch if they wanted to come see me.
Okay.
But I noticed that people came in and they were just, and not even just me, like even the stuff on the wall, they were really taking it in, because the way they presented it and the way I tried to present it was make it very accessible and make it relevant to the anniversary stuff. Like, this is why it's important, this is why we're doing this, and sort of here's what happened. And when it's done in a way that is accessible, people just latched onto it. Yes. And I noticed I wasn't paying attention too much while I was talking, but somebody came up to me afterwards and said, nobody left during the talk, which she found surprising because, well, it was a history talk and it was during lunch, and, like, why would somebody stay for the whole 40 minutes? And that was her comment to me, that, I mean, if it's done properly, which is what I think you guys do, it can be accessible, it can be enriching to the community, and it can tell us something about who we are and where we come from.
Yes, I completely agree. And we do have numerous communities. I mean, we have the general public is a community. We actually do have a community of historians who follow, and there is an internal dimension to some of our posts. Archivists and librarians are really enthusiastic. Yeah. And then there's the digital humanities.
Right.
Twitterverse, basically, that comes to our site when we post issues that interest them. Yeah. So we have all these diverse, and I think each of us on the team and each blogger reaches a different community, which is testament, I think, to the platform, that we can reach different people.
Yeah, and that's something you can't get in print, right? Like,
no, and I mean, with print, you also have the problem you don't always know what your readership is like. Whereas
Right.
we actually have fairly sophisticated analytics where we can trace when someone comes to an article, how long are they reading it for? Are they sticking around for like 10 seconds? Then they probably didn't read it.
Right.
Did they stick around for 2 minutes?
Yeah.
They probably read it. So
Yeah.
it's a neat
Yeah.
way to just track people's behavior.
Mm-hmm. Now we're doing a podcast.
Yes.
So this is a new thing. No, not completely. This format of a podcast is new that we're doing now, and that I'm going to continue. But you guys have some podcasts up there.
We do. The one recurring, I think the first big podcast is Sean Courage has run this environmental history podcast.
Right.
That's been quite successful. And we've also, for the last probably 2 years now, when there has been a high-profile talk, for example, some of these History Matters lectures,
Yes.
roundtables at a university, a keynote address, something that really resonates, we've recorded it and put it online.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these have been some of our most successful objects. Ian Milligan gave a speech on the Harper government and the militarization of Canadian history.
Yeah.
That has been one of the most cited things. I spoke to him, and he was amazed at how many people he runs into that have heard his talk.
Right.
These are people who weren't at the graduate conference listening to his keynote speech, but they downloaded it, listened to it, and reacted to it.
Yeah.
And same with Stuart Henderson, who gave a great talk on Yorkville. I've had friends that have come out of the blue and said, I listened to Stuart's talk, and it was really, really inspiring. Mm-hmm. Like, who knew Yorkville was such an interesting place? And he similarly told me, I run into people who've listened to my podcast that remark on it almost randomly. So they're reaching these large audiences that are people at the gym, commuting, etc.
Yeah, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that history through this medium, now it can be more portable even. That, I was driving in my car, I can put it on my iPod, throw it in and listen to it. Or, I'm at the gym, I'm on the treadmill, and I can listen to it. I mean, I think it's really exciting, these new ways that we as a community of people who study history, that we can reach people.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of really cool possibilities here, and that you guys have already had success in this. Really, to me, makes me even more excited about starting this process.
Yeah, no, and we're really excited too.
So, now you personally have an interest in digital humanities.
Yes.
Now, would you classify the website as giving you that window into that, or sort of the springboard into this next study, since because you're done the dissertation, like your doctor. So your first project was rebel youth and the leftist movement.
Yeah, I called it Rebel Youth, New Leftist Youth in Labor.
Okay.
1964 to 1973.
All right, and that is currently in the process of being turned into a monograph.
Yes, I have an advanced contract with University of British Columbia Press.
Oh, very nice.
And I'm currently trimming it down from its exhaustive 400-page length into something that hopefully somebody would be able to read. And actually, just by trimming it is forcing me to think my ideas.
Well, I've always heard, though, that it's easier to cut down than to build up once you're done the dissertation.
I always thought that. I don't know.
But so now this is a bit of a departure then into this digital humanities project, right?
Methodologically, it is.
Yeah.
My general story of getting into the digital humanities is two things. Firstly, in my own work, I started out small. So like the first chapter I wrote was about a strike in Toronto, 400 strike supporters, which is massive for the community I was writing about, but fairly small in the grand scheme of historical actors. Moving all the way through the 6 chapters of my book to the last one, I was making large arguments about, 4 million baby boomers, talking about youth culture, and really excited about big historical events and phenomena. So as this is going on, there's the rise of big data as a topic of sort of inquiry, and people wondering about how we're going to deal with large information repositories, whether they're the Internet Archive and its historical collections, Google Books and its goal to have every book ever produced digitized, and so forth. So thinking about that. And that sort of dovetailed with, although ActiveHistory.ca isn't a digital history project, or not in the hard digital history way, it brought me into this community. So I went to a technology and humanities camp and literally had my mind blown with what you could do.
Okay.
And way back in the day when I was like in elementary school and high school, I used to program all the time.
Okay.
And then for a number of reasons, I lost touch of that. Some of problems with, OAC math, which it's funny because I'm now actually trying to learn some basic linear algebra. But as a more disciplined individual, it's not as hard as it seemed to a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
But so I had my mind blown. So the confluence of where my intellectual interests as a historian were going, which was towards bigger phenomena, and then my methodological sort of retouching with my old computer programming past, and realizing that we're sort of entering a new information age where suddenly we have massive amounts of information, and it would be really cool to find ways to interact with it as a historian.
Yes.
And take this professional training, take some new training.
Yeah.
And hopefully learn new things.
Yeah, and it seems as though you're dealing with the big questions that are facing the profession.
Yes, that's been increasingly my bugbear.
Yeah, that's really good. Like we're taping this Wednesday of the CHA.
Yes.
So yesterday was the keynote,
mm-hmm.
and he was talking about a lot of these issues too. That speech about
Stephen Breyer.
Yeah, how to use these digital technologies most effectively to engage people and also preserve sources.
Yes.
In a way that is still true to the sources. Because the last time I saw you was in Guelph at the Digital Historiography Conference.
Yes.
And a lot of the discussion there was, if something's online and something's digitized, does it lose some of that original value that you get from holding it in your hand?
Yes.
And so, you got to figure out, how do you preserve that element of it when you digitize it? Because even a scan, sometimes you can't pick up the same.
Yes, and I've been doing also work on databases and how
right.
they mediate what we learn as historians. But I'm also increasingly I like the digitization stuff, and I've been doing a lot of work with the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail, trying to interrogate that for an article. But I'm also interested about born digital sources that were birthed onto the web in, say, 1996. They never existed in print form. They exist on the web. What do we do with that? When it comes time to write a social history of the year 2000, Library and Archives Canada isn't going to have print material because basically due to budget cuts, they don't collect new material.
Right.
Local archives are getting cut because their budgets are similarly falling under this austerity measure. They might not have the sources.
Yeah.
So if you want to write that history 2000, you've got to go online.
Yeah.
And how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
When maybe there'll be a formal archive for 0.5% of what's out there or less. I mean, there's just so much information.
Yeah.
So just intellectually thinking about how will a historian in 20 years approach writing the past?
Sure.
And what can we do now to make sure that historian in 20 years is able to do his or her job properly?
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise I worry computer scientists are going to write history, biologists are going to write history, people with the relevant computational skills will do it, and historians will be left behind or not able to participate fully on project teams.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other issues too is that we don't use paper as much either.
No.
Right? So even if archives aren't collecting paper, there isn't even that much paper that they can even collect on things like I read a lot of correspondence between CBC members for my own stuff. That would all be emails now, and most people wouldn't print that out anyway. So there's no paper even to collect. So you got to figure out how to collect those things that are just already digital, because you don't even have to digitize it, right?
Yes.
And so I think that adds another layer. And I saw a talk, this is 4 years ago now, somebody was talking about this issue. It was out in Victoria, and he was saying, like, a historian in 100 years, they're not going to be using paper, because we're not really leaving a lot of paper trails.
No.
So, and that ties into this whole database collection. What do you collect? What do you like? To me, it's just, I'm glad it's interesting. I'm glad I'm not trying to answer these questions, because I don't think I can. Yeah. At least at this point in my life, I don't. I understand the issues. I can't come up with any solutions for me. Like.
Yeah, I mean, emails. Most official government emails should still be preserved.
Yeah.
If they're considered relevant and not of a personal nature. But even then, I mean, everybody's been on email chains where 100 people are CC'd for no apparent reason, or email chains just because emails are essentially for the user, they're free to send.
Yes.
Whereas sending a letter was never, even in a government, I mean, it was more work to send a letter than it was to just add 50 people to your CC field.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to deal. I mean, are we going to be able to read every single email? Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we will be able to.
Yeah.
I don't know archival preservation for these sort of things.
Right.
But increasingly, with the amount of email being sent and the amount of spam, we're going to have to deal with larger and larger data sets to find out meaningful information.
If it's done properly, at least with email, then you can scroll through the whole conversation, as opposed to having 5 pieces of paper, which are part of one conversation, but strewn through 1,000 pieces of paper in an archive box. So, and it has its pros and cons.
Yeah, and less paper cuts and less.
That's right. Less dust in your face, But as we're talking about this, and we're talking about historians in 100 years, it makes me think about dying. It could be very depressing. Like,
yes,
we're preserving our own legacy. I'm 26 years old, and I'm just talking about preserving stuff for people 100 years from now.
Oh yeah, well,
I'm not ready to die.
Well, at my CHA panel on Monday, because quite a few people were live tweeting it.
Yeah,
and I was joking because it was about some of these issues, and I was joking with them that, Andrew, the proof, if a historian looks at this, because tweets are now all collected by the Library of Congress. A social historian 50 years ago, or using traditional sources, wouldn't really be able to tell that you were in this panel.
Right.
Like, maybe you're on the program, but who knows where you were.
Sure.
But now there actually is a record that Andrew Watson, between 3:15 and 4:30, was in MC 2034 in the Mathematics and Computer Building at the University of Waterloo, and here's what he was saying, that because people leave these little ephemeral things.
Right.
The problem is we can't read reading every tweet sent at Congress 12 would be a real endeavor. I mean, that tweet wall is spiraling in the beer tent, right, as people get into this. And that increasing that historian in 50 years, I think, if he or she wants to tackle that issue, is going to need some sort of basic data mining, textual analysis. But of course, I always say that doesn't mean we all have to become programmers.
Right.
That traditional archive work is always going to be critically important. Yeah. Oral history is going to be critically important. Collective memory, etc. That just as we don't all have to be the best up-to-date on demographic modeling, we don't all have to become digital historians.
Right.
But I do really see digital history as it's going to be an emerging field, but it's just going to be a subfield and share the same common goals of uncovering the past.
Right. But it's really interesting, this whole development. Now, let's talk about this podcast.
Yep.
Just to transition back to sort of the website a little bit. So we talked about the podcast, and I had my brilliant idea, which is have me talk to people. This is how my mind works. Like my great brilliant idea for history is me just talking to people. And you guys seemed on board with this.
Yeah.
So the basic concept will be this setting. It's just very conversational, talking about whether it be issues related to history and the study of history. We got one coming up, hopefully in a little while, talking about archives and the cuts related to archives. And we have a guy he was sent a bunch of boxes from a local archive, and they said go through it, figure out what we need to keep.
Okay.
So we'll have that sort of conversation that'll lead to discussions of how do we study history and what is how selective is history based on what is kept, and these sorts of issues. We taped one yesterday with Victoria Lamb Drover, where she's talking about participation, and
I saw the tweets.
Yeah,
supposed to be a stellar presentation.
Very, very good presentation. And the podcast was also, if I may, was very good. She's clearly really into this topic, and it's a great topic too. And so we had a nice mix of like actual serious discussion about participation, and we talked about Hal Johnson's mustache a little bit.
Okay.
So this very nice mix between very conversational and just trying to have some fun with the subject matter.
Yes.
And this is kind of, and you guys seem like this is sort of fits in with your overall goal, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we can make history fun, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I put in, I wrote a blog post, which I'm assuming will pair with this podcast,
yes.
is like announcing it, that the goal isn't to make fun of history, it's to have fun with it.
Yes.
And I didn't put this in the blog post. I had a draft of a paragraph that I was going to include, but I took it out because I didn't think it sounded right. There are some issues that obviously you can't really have fun with.
No.
And they need a certain level of gravitas, if not solemnity, when you're dealing with them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do, and we will talk about those sorts of things. And when we do, we'll do it. We'll be sure to do it in a very appropriate manner. But at the same time, we're going to do some podcasts that are just more fun and playing around with the past.
Yes.
The one that I'm really looking forward to, and I just explained this one to you, and everyone who I've talked to seems excited about it. Now, granted, I've talked to mostly fellow grad students or younger people, so I haven't got a feel if any of the more senior people in the academy would appreciate this, but I don't think anyone would have a super objection to it. We're going to do a Prime Minister's fantasy draft, which I'm super excited about. We got 3 other guys from the University of Ottawa who are come in with me, and like a hockey fantasy draft, we're going to draft Prime Ministers, and then we'll see who wins based on a listener poll. So that's the sort of stuff. We're going to have this nice mix between, telling the stories of the past from various people across the country through their research, and then we're also going to do more fun things and seeing how the past, how it relates to more popular culture things. The CBC has a new show coming out in the fall. I'm pretty sure it's coming out in the fall. Historical drama. We'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe try and get one of the writers on.
Do you know what the historical drama is?
I don't.
Is it a confidential thing?
No, I read it. They did it in their upfronts, in their fall announcement. They put it out, and I can't remember what it was. I'm pretty sure it was military something, but I can't remember.
That would seem in keeping with trends.
Yeah. So we'll maybe like review that, talk about that, see if we can get a writer on. There's a couple musicians. There's one who I reference specifically, Del Barber, who I really like. He has a song about historical figures who showed up at his house for a party. And so maybe talk to him about what
Canadian figures?
No, just like world figures. So I think Marx is in there and a few other people. And so maybe bring someone like him on, if not him specifically, and talk about the song. What sort of historical references work on stage? Which ones don't? Like, do you have to write the song, do different versions of the song, see what plays? And is it really an accessible song? And that sort of speaks to how history is situated within popular culture in Canada, because I really think that history has a more active role in day-to-day life than most people are conscious of.
Yes.
You know, with various references and even street names and things like that. Like, the past is very present, the past is very present in our lives. And most people, and I think including myself, I don't want to speak for any other people who study history, but we're not conscious of it.
No.
Right? So, and that's sort of one of the things that I want to try and do with this podcast.
I think that's great. I mean, because as you say, the past is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, everything has a historical context to it and a reason for being. And it's all, I mean, I think it was a big history talk, I think by David Christensen, who's working with Bill Gates on this big history project. And his argument was really that history and understanding our past is what makes us human. Because we have the ability to improve every generation. Whereas the example of a cat learns a ton of stuff by the end of his or her life.
Yeah.
When that cat passes away, there isn't that much knowledge transferred on to the next generation. So cats don't really, they haven't
That's why they keep playing with paper balls.
Precisely, with the laser pointer. They chase it around. Whereas if they could record their history, maybe the next generation of cats would be like, don't chase the laser pointer.
Right.
I don't want to trivialize history, but I think it really is the thing that makes humans human.
Right.
The ability to understand and see where we've come from. And sort of have a humbling experience of our lives in this much, much, much broader context.
Sure. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Yeah.
I love studying. I love, it's almost like you're meeting people from the past and you get to know them a little bit and you could tell their stories and, it just, there's something about it that is very humbling and it makes me feel very small a lot of the times. Like my little world that I live in compared to what these figures were doing, dealing with these monumental challenges and changes and really changing the world a lot of the time. And not even, like, I studied the CBC and talking about these guys who initiated this broadcast who are still here today. But even people who get studied, like, we're going to have Katrina Shrigley on at some point and talking about feminists and how feminist historians talk about reclaiming the past or the women in the story. And even what those women went through, and, I know it's been trivialized by some older male historians, but those women also have a major part in the story of the country. So you get to know those people and understand their stories, and really everyone has a part in this larger mosaic, not even of just Canada, just of the world. And so when we get to know these people and hear their stories, it really is a powerful discipline.
Well, I primarily identify as a social historian. So the stories of ordinary lives and the stories of, youth, what was it like to grow up in 1955? I just find that fascinating. Yeah. And because it's different than today, and in some ways it's not, of course, there's constants, but just trying to uncover and imagine what it would have been like to live there, and the forces, and why were the 60s what they were? Why did people, and just as I suspect in 20 years, someone will be looking at the events in Quebec, in Montreal right now, and figuring out what that's about. Because obviously tuition's a catalyst. Yeah. But it's not just tuition. Right. Like, there's something bigger going on.
Bigger social things going on.
Liberals, etc. So, fascinating story is going to be told there. Yeah. And the decisions of all those individual people that go out there is just the best part of history, figuring out
For sure.
Even if you can't, I mean, I'm not saying we need a deterministic model, but just to get that story and to bring clarity to what happened.
And I think for me too, when I learn about these stories and the people, I feel this really strong sense of responsibility to them as humans. And most if not all the people who I study are dead now.
Yes.
And so I feel this really strong responsibility to tell their story. In a sense, it's the way they understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And try and get inside their head as much as I can now, figure out why they did what they did, and try and tell their experiences. And that sense of responsibility, that sort of guides me as I'm going through, because you never want to get into too much conjecture or that kind of stuff, or at least I don't.
No.
Right? Because you want to be true to the sources, and you want to be true to those people and their stories. And
well, the people I study are generally, some have passed away, but the majority are probably still alive.
Right. So your responsibility is even stronger, because they're going to come yell at you.
Well, they do, and I interviewed about 75 people for my dissertation.
Yeah.
Like I have these networks and this sense of personal obligation. So I don't think it's any more or less than your obligation and feeling to the past.
For sure.
But it's also complicated when you've got differing narratives.
Yes.
How do you piece that together? And to me, even just the experience, they've got the authority based on having lived there.
Yeah.
And that actually is bumping up against my authority as someone who has some professional training, has looked at all these archives and has interviewed a large amount of people. And balancing those authorities is like a real obligation and a real responsibility that we have to take seriously.
For sure.
And it's funny because people talk about the ethical obligation we have to oral interviews, right?
Yeah. And
you just raised the fact you've got an oral obligation, ethical obligation to the dead. So we're all sort of on the same ethical level.
Yeah,
right?
and that's sort of, not that I think anybody would go over the line in any sense, but it sort of keeps us, grounded in a sense, or keeps us sort of moving in the right direction and always searching for as much as possible the truth and getting down to the bare bones of things. And I think everybody who's here this week would probably agree that that's the key, is really finding out the truth.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about truth. Truth is a word that always
that's
throws
true.
up a flag,
that's
right?
a bad word. Yeah, you're right. That spawns a whole another discussion.
Yeah.
But I think, but the meaning of what I'm trying to say.
Yes, no, and there is an objectivist strain through historical work. Like we do, at some point, none of us want to tell lies.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah. We want to be true to the people in the story and their stories.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the basic framework of the podcast and what we're going to try and do.
Perfect.
And so what's next for you? What's coming up?
What's next for me? I'm going to go back to the CHA. Hopefully the Active History Committee, which is affiliated with their website, is running a mini conference. So I was just at a panel on augmented reality and the War of 1812, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
So hopefully go back for a panel, and then tonight at 7 p.m. we're having a large keynote address downtown at the Waterloo Public Library.
Very nice.
On the War of 1812. Yeah. Whose war was it anyways?
Oh, yes. I did see that in the...
Yeah, it was in the Waterloo Record.
Wow.
So
it should be a nice crowd.
We're hoping for a good turnout, and hopefully some Congress delegates we hope will come, but we really, really are hoping to see the general public out there at this free, accessible, fun event.
That'd be great. And generally, the book, you have a contract, you have a tentative date for it, or is it still? You're still working on it.
The goal is to submit it by the end of summer.
Okay.
And my contract says October, so
there's
a bit of leeway there.
All right. So it can be a Christmas gift.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to getting it off, and then waiting anxiously, of course, for the peer reviewers.
So for everyone listening, the title to look for is.
The main title will be Rebel Youth.
Okay.
I think it's a good catchy thing that encapsulates my argument.
Yeah.
And the subtitle, there's about 3 or 4 working versions on the go.
All right. And people can follow you on Twitter.
They can. My username is Ian Milligan 1. And I also have a website at ianmilligan.ca.
Terrific. And I'm going to start tweeting.
That's awesome.
I've never done this before.
It's a lot of fun.
I have the handle. Once we post this, my first tweet is going to be about this.
Okay.
When this goes up.
I found you on Twitter, but you hadn't posted anything yet.
No.
I don't know if I want to follow someone who never posted.
I have 2 followers, my brother and the Reverend from the church in my hometown.
Okay.
They're my 2 followers right now. The handle for me is Dr. Shawnee Fever.
Yeah.
Dr. DrSeannYFever. It's a WKRP in Cincinnati reference.
Okay.
So Andrew Farrell, Dean Moser, and Derek Martins, they can take credit for that. That's my curling team in Ottawa. Andrew came up with it, and the other guy sort of chided me when I didn't really get the reference.
Okay.
So when I was trying to figure out a handle, I figured that why not? I said this on the podcast that we recorded yesterday, but it'll be posted after this one. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Maybe a little too kitschy or something, but it's growing on me. So I'm just going to go with it until somebody tells me to stop.
Oh,
so you can follow me there. You can follow Ian on his, and check out ActiveHistory.ca. If you want to email specifically to me at the podcast, I created a Gmail account, historyslam@gmail.com. So you can catch me there. Thanks for doing this, Ian.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been great. And remember, if you see Enrico Palazzo out tonight, please say hi for me.